It's great to be here. So as you heard, I'm Hubert, founder and CEO of ProductBoard. And while I'm here, I founded a product management system company. So that's a good reason to be at a product management conference. Then also, I'm a product manager by background. And most importantly, I love making products. It's just the craft of creating something is something that inspires me. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about what is it that the best product makers and the best product teams do in order to create something that's really incredibly great. And I want to talk about that. And that's the topic of product excellence. And then I want to introduce you to a concept that I hope can help you on the strategic level to think about how to bring your products to the market and make sure that they're the right products. And that's the concept of product gravity. So let's dive in. If you think and if you look at some of the companies that are considered exceptional when it comes to creating products, product-led companies that are making strides and making headlines in the recent days, you notice that really what makes them different is the product that they create. And there's nowhere to hide behind just marketing and sales execution. You really need to have a good product to win in the market. And thanks to the opportunity of running a product management company, product management system company, we've talked to thousands of customers. We actually have over 2,000 customers using our system. And so we ask ourselves, what is it that makes these teams that create something really amazing different? And how do they operate day to day? How do they organize? And how do they think? What is the process that they have in place? And we found out that it can be summed up in these three areas, the three key pillars that are product vision, product strategy, and product execution. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean here. We probably all know as product makers, product managers, that we need to know where we're going long term. Where is it that we're trying to get in 3, 5, 10 years from now? But then, obviously, in order to formulate the vision properly, it's not just some gut feeling. It needs to be informed by really deep insights that come from the customers and from the marketplace. And so the critical thing here that the best teams do is that they are very closely listening to the market continuously to make sure that their vision is informed. So that's the first pillar. The second, though, is that we can't just blindly start take the whole vision and start building all the little pieces at the same time. We need to have a strategy because we have limited resources and we need to decide what's the path to getting to the vision and what's the sequence of steps that we're going to follow in order to get there. And so that's the clarity around how we're going to get there, where we're starting, what's next, what segment we're going to start with, what are the needs that we're going to focus on first and second and so on. That constitutes this pillar of strategy. And then the third piece, which probably we're most familiar with, execution, agile methodology, make sure that everybody's aligned, that we're efficiently building things, that people understand why things that are on the roadmap. That's the third pillar of execution. Now, though, the teams that really excel and that achieve excellence in terms of the process, coincidentally, we have Wi-Fi password here, excellence, even though I don't think we sponsored it. But product excellence happens when you have this intersection. And there's an alignment around what's the product vision, what's the product strategy, and then what's the product execution. I want to talk about the piece of the strategy, because I feel like that we hear a lot about doing user research and listening to the customers, which is informing the vision, and a lot of the lean startup methodology that obviously has taken the world by storm. Steve Blank was my professor at Berkeley. I'm very plugged into that, but I feel like that's quite well understood, and there's a lot of content on it. Similarly, on the execution side, agile methodology, manifesto written in 2001, and then since that's kind of best practice, nobody probably argues that's the right way when it comes to the delivery. But when it comes to the strategic piece, when it comes to how do we make decisions and how should we prioritize, what is it that we should build next? Should we satisfy needs of this segment or that segment? Should we improve functionality for a need or use case that we're already solving with the product, or should we instead add adjacent use cases to the product? That's something where there's a lot of thinking that can be done and a lot of best practices to be shared. And so I want to talk about that. And so if you think about strategy, it's a deliberate sequence of steps that gets you to your vision. Like, how do I get to the vision? But unfortunately, it's also where a lot of product makers, a lot of us make big mistakes. We typically focus, and we try to build too many things at the same time. And there's like a visibility into why things ended up on the roadmap and why something else didn't get prioritized. There's a lot of misalignment and so on, and it all stems from misalignment around the strategy. And I realized that this concept of strategy can be pretty abstract. It's like, oh yeah, there's a strategy, what does it really mean? And so I've always been asking myself, and in my career as a product manager, I've been looking for analogies that would help people understand concepts that are abstract, like product strategy. And I came up with this theory of product gravity. And product gravity sounds like physics. I was a math and physics major in high school, and that's probably to be blamed, for this product gravity idea. But I basically said, what if the same way we think in physics, and I'm not going to go to string theory and even theory of relativity, I'm just going to keep it pretty simple on the Newtonian side. It's just matter and forces and kind of the mechanics, right? And so in that world, we created a theory, the Newtonian Mechanics, which help us predict how objects move in the world, right? What are the forces, how they attract, and so on. And I thought that this is a very interesting analogy for the product management world, where we don't deal with objects, physical objects. There's no flying planets. But we deal with the needs and use cases that people have. We need to understand how big, important, valuable the needs are in order to prioritize them properly and in order to put them in the right sequence into the product, and that is then the foundation of the product strategy. So join me now on this journey of okay, let's apply this idea of the theory of gravity, but let's apply it on the product management world. And so planets have mass, the needs, the problems, the use cases, the jobs to be done, pick whatever is your favorite methodology framework, they have value. And if you think about what is it that constitutes the value, it's really two key dimensions. One is the importance. How important is a problem, or how painful pain is for somebody, how severe a need is. So that's the y-axis. And on the x-axis, we have frequency. Because if you have something that's super important, for example, like filing your tax return every year, that's important. You're doing it once a year, so the frequency is very low. So it's going to be high up there. Then you have things that are, maybe not that important, like how annoyed are you by low quality of public transportation on every daily commute, right? So that's going to be high frequency, maybe low importance. And obviously the most valuable problems and pain points, use cases, needs, are going to be the ones that are high importance and high frequency. And those are the most valuable needs that when we're deciding what should be the opportunities that we want to focus on, what are the needs that we want to solve for the people, and introduce products that are going to satisfy those needs, we should have a good understanding of both, of the importance and frequency. And I want to give you an example with companies that you probably know, are very familiar with, and needs that you're also really familiar with. So let's think about task management, and let's think about messaging. Task management, I have here example of Asana. It's a little logo there, task management, because they're solving primarily the need of managing your tasks. And then here I have an example of Slack as a messaging application. And so what I did here, I thought, okay, and please, this is not like scientifically measured, precisely where it sits, right? This is to illustrate the concept. I thought, it seems like messaging is a more valuable use case, or more important use case or need than task management, because I need to communicate with my colleagues to get most of my stuff done. I also need task management, but if I think about it, like, could I live without task management or live without being able to collaborate with people around me? I feel like the importance is higher on the messaging. And obviously I'm saying I feel like, but it's informed by my experience and observation how the world looks, communication with people, doing research, like all that stuff, right? If I'm a product manager in this space. And so I put Slack there, and then I said, okay, frequency. It actually turns out that people spend like 3 hours a day in Slack communicating and collaborating. It's super high frequency need. Whereas task management is not a high frequency. You put it there, you obviously manage the workflow, but it's a lower frequency. And so if I look at this, and if I try to now estimate, okay, what's the value of the use case of messaging versus task management, I argue that the value, relatively speaking, is higher for Slack, and that Slack is solving for a higher value use case. Obviously, they are both important. You need to get done both, but if I have to force rank them, Slack is on top here. And so now we have two worlds, right? We have two needs that I give you an example. Slack in the messaging space and Asana in the task management space. And if you think of them like planets, so Slack would be a bigger planet, and Asana would be a little smaller planet because the value is like the mass of the planet. And if you think about the broader space that they operate in, it's basically, on the left, I put like internal collaboration as one area for the needs. And there's Slack, and there's Asana for task management, maybe there's Trello, there could be calendar systems, like all the use cases that are relatively close to each other when it comes to how people work, how they collaborate. And there's obviously many more, like we do different things throughout our day. There's obviously different systems. There's different areas, different planetary systems. That's what I'm trying to do here. Like, customer communication, and maybe in that little system or galaxy or whatever you want to call it, there's Zendesk, and there's Intercom, and there's Drift, and there's many, many other systems. And I find it useful to think about it this way because it turns out that just like planets, even if you have two gigantic planets, two important use cases, it depends how close they are to each other. And because the closer they are, the more they interact with each other, and the more they influence each other. So again, to give you an example here. On top, I have Slack, and then here I have Asana. And if I think about the interaction as me as a worker in the modern era, I'm spending my time and I'm sending messages to Slack, and then here and there I kind of like jump to the other planet of Asana and I make a note, and then this is my task. And then I go back and I chat again, and then I go back and forth and so on and so on. And so you see that these two needs, the needs of the task management and messaging, are very closely tied together because people interact with both of these use cases and both of these applications interchangeably during the day. And now that's a very important thing for me to understand, because if I'm a product manager thinking about these use cases, I need to understand the flow and I need to understand where are people spending most time. And if I know that frequency is high for Slack and importance is high as well, I can deduce that this is a higher value use case. And you'll see very soon where I'm going with this. So now it might be a little confused. Okay, so it's like, what is this stuff, right? This is like planets and needs. And so how is it going to help me with any product strategy? How is it going to help me be a better product maker, better product manager? You might be feeling like a little lost astronaut, and I apologize, but I'll save you. So the reason why I did it is that I find it very, very valuable to use it as a concept and to explain to people when they're asking, hey, imagine that you're at Slack, and you are thinking about, should we introduce task management as a feature for Slack? So now, okay, we have a messaging use case. Asana is doing that. Should we do it strategically, or should we stick to what we have? Or vice versa, if I'm a product manager at Asana, should I build messaging functionality to bring people closer? Because I don't want people to jump from, as a user, I don't want to jump from Slack to Asana all the time. I want to have one system ideally. Because I'm, context switching, it's like two different tools, two different UIs, and there's, obviously I want to have the best experience for whatever need I'm trying to satisfy. And ideally, the best experience is like completely seamless experience where everything looks familiar and it's kind of like one system. And so if I think about it, that I pick, hey, this is the system where I'm operating, and these are the planets that are around me, I need to be aware of the pool, and I need to be very strategically thinking as if I don't introduce the functionality of task management as a Slack product manager, am I risking losing the people to Asana if Asana introduces messaging, or vice versa? And now, what position am I? If I don't do it, should I do it or should I not? And if you think about, well, I'm a bigger planet, I'm in a better position to protect my messaging use case, and Asana is a worse position, that kind of tells you something about the dynamic. And I'll explain that a little more. Similarly, I'm going to be thinking, well, should I go and introduce functionality that has to do with external customer communication? And maybe I shouldn't, because that means that I'm going to start building a small little planet in a completely different system where there's maybe already bigger planets, and the bigger planets might eclipse, and their gravitational force might take my little planet into their sphere, and then eventually I'm going to crash into the planet, and they're going to take over. And so where's your planet is my question when you're thinking about these, and when you're thinking about the jobs to be done and needs. Make sure that you identify the system that you're playing with, and make sure that you understand what are the other planets circulating your little planet of use cases, and make sure that you don't spread yourself too thin. And so who will win? In this battle, let's say that forget the external communication with customers and focus on this battle between Slack and Asana. Well, I'd argue that if I am a product manager at Asana, I'd be actually very worried. Because it seems to me that because the Slack's use case and the need that Slack satisfies has a bigger and higher gravity because it's more important and more valuable, if Slack starts making strides towards my task management system, the task management needs, if they introduce a really well-designed and maybe even simple way to deliver on task management, because Slack as a use case, the messaging use case has higher gravity, it's much more likely that people are going to abandon Asana and stick to Slack versus the other way around. If Asana builds messaging, they're coming from the worst position comparatively. At the same time, if I'm a product manager or CEO of Asana, I would want to invest into messaging, because in the long term, this is going to be super hard for me to compete, because as Slack grows, they add slower new functionality to it, whether it's directly or through acquisitions, little integrations, but people will be absorbed by the gravity of the core use case of the messaging more and more. And if I don't start building my mass and kind of start fighting proactively, I'm likely going to lose in the long term. So this is the idea how if you just think about the value of the needs, and if you think about what is it that you're protecting, if you kind of apply the similar thinking like Newtonian physics, you can actually have a very informed conversation with the rest of your team. And suddenly this concept of what's the most important or more valuable use case or need, you can tie it to something that people already understand. So what I want you to take away from this talk and for you to remember are the two things. We should all aspire to product excellence, and we need to make sure that we understand the vision and that it's supported by the insights, by understanding and listening proactively to the market, that we have a very clear product strategy, which is the sequence of how we're going to go to the market. And then the last piece, the execution, if we all combine it together and we have roadmap and we have the delivery systems in place, then we achieve product excellence in the middle. And this is how the best companies really operate. And then the second point to remember, be mindful of product gravity. Be mindful of the use cases. Realize that if you're building something that is not as important and frequent, you might be absorbed by a bigger planet because the gravitational force will pull you there. And it might be your strategy. It might be your strategy to build a simple feature use case and sell it to somebody. But it better be your strategy rather be your surprise. That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Do we have any questions?
Q&A. It's interesting how the topic of strategy is frequently overlooked, right? I have another thing that, as people are thinking through questions, another example that I used is, so imagine that you're the CEO of Superhuman. Who knows Superhuman? Email client. And so you have a way how to go to the market. You can launch a new free email app, just like many other people did before, or you can launch relatively expensive app for a very small group of customers that have high pain, because the value of the use case depends also on the segment. The importance and the frequency differs, because if you're a high-profile executive who's drowning in emails, in email use case is much more important for you. So what they did strategically is that they said, hey, we're going to start focusing on a very small customer segment with super high value need, and we're going to charge a lot for it. And they're still kept the doors open to later go down market. And just like Uber did with starting with Uber Black and then going down market, just like Tesla did with starting Roadster and then eventually getting to mass market vehicle. They deliberately chose this strategy to go to the market in this way. Anyway, that's another story that I like. Questions? Any other questions? Great. Well, I know this is coming towards the end of the day. Thank you so much. This is great.